They thought this 73-year-old widow would just hand over everything without a fight. But when I discovered what my own family was planning behind my back, they learned that Dorothy Patterson doesn't go down without a war. What I did next would leave them scrambling to save their own futures while I watched from my front porch, sipping sweet tea and counting my victories. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. My name is Dorothy Patterson, and at 73 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. I was wrong. After raising 4 children as a single mother, working 3 jobs to put them through college, and spending the last 15 years caring for my late husband Harold through his battle with Alzheimer's, I believed my family understood sacrifice. I believed they understood loyalty. I believed they understood love. I was wrong about that too. Harold and I had been married for 52 years when he passed last spring. We'd built a good life together, nothing fancy, but solid. Our house in Millbrook had been paid off for 20 years. Harold's pension and our savings meant I was comfortable, not wealthy, but secure enough to enjoy my golden years without worry. The life insurance payout would ensure I could stay in my home, maybe even help the grandkids with college someday. That's what I thought. Anyway, my 4 children, David, Jennifer, Patricia, and Michael, had all done well for themselves. David was a successful accountant in Atlanta. Jennifer worked in marketing for a tech company in Austin. Patricia was a nurse practitioner in Denver, and Michael had his own construction business right here in town. They all had nice homes, good careers, and families of their own. I was proud of what they'd accomplished. But pride, as I was about to learn, can blind you to some ugly truths. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks after Harold's funeral. I was still deep in grief, still learning how to sleep in an empty house, when David called with what he called a practical suggestion. "Mom," he said, his voice taking on that tone adults use when they're about to tell a child something they think the child won't understand. "Jennifer and I have been talking, and we're worried about you being in that big house all by yourself." I'd lived in this house for 32 years. It was a modest 3-bedroom colonial, hardly what anyone would call big, but I listened. "We think it might be time to consider some alternatives, something smaller, more manageable, maybe one of those nice senior living communities." Senior living communities? He meant nursing homes, but was too polite to say it directly. "David, honey, I'm managing just fine. The house isn't too much for me." "I know you think that, Mom, but you're 73 years old. What if you fall down those stairs? What if something happens and nobody's around to help?" The same conversation happened with Jennifer 2 days later. Then Patricia called with identical concern. Finally, Michael stopped by in person, armed with brochures for active adult communities and a rehearsed speech about my safety and well-being. 4 separate conversations, 4 children suddenly concerned about my living situation, all within 1 week. That should have been my first clue that this was coordinated. The second clue came when Patricia mentioned, almost casually, that selling the house would free up capital that could be better invested for your long-term care needs. The third clue was when Michael offered to handle all the details of finding me a new place, dealing with real estate agents, managing the financial transitions. "You shouldn't have to worry about any of this stuff, Mom. Let us take care of everything. Let them take care of." How thoughtful. But the fourth clue, the one that opened my eyes completely, came by accident. I'd always been a creature of habit. Every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I drove to Kroger for my weekly grocery shopping. I had my list organized by aisle, my coupons clipped and sorted, my route through the store planned to perfection. Harold used to tease me about my grocery store efficiency, but it was one of the small ways I maintained control over my life after he passed. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I made my coffee, read the morning paper, and headed out with my carefully prepared shopping list. But halfway to the store, I realized I'd forgotten the list on my kitchen counter. At my age, trying to shop from memory was a recipe for disaster. I'd either forget half of what I needed or come home with things I didn't need at all. So I turned around and headed back home, annoyed with myself for the oversight, but knowing it was better to retrieve the list than to wing it. When I pulled back into my driveway, I noticed Michael's truck parked in front of the house. Strange, since he hadn't mentioned planning to visit. Michael was usually good about calling ahead, especially during work hours. His construction business kept him busy, and unexpected visits weren't his style. I was about to call out to him when I heard voices from the backyard. Michael wasn't alone, multiple voices, actually, and they were speaking in hushed, urgent tones that made me pause. Curious, I walked around the side of the house, staying close to the hedge that separated my property from the neighbors. What I saw made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my children. All 4 of my children were standing on my back patio. David had flown in from Atlanta. Jennifer had driven up from Austin. Patricia was there from Denver. And Michael, of course, lived locally. They were having a family meeting in my backyard while I was supposed to be grocery shopping. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a planned gathering, carefully timed for when they thought I'd be safely out of the house for at least an hour. They knew my Tuesday morning routine. They'd used my predictable schedule against me. The realtor thinks we can get at least $320,000 for the house, Jennifer was saying, consulting notes on her phone. Maybe more if we do some cosmetic updates first. Fresh paint, new carpet in the bedrooms, maybe update the kitchen backsplash. That's more than I expected, Patricia replied, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. Split 4 ways. That's $80,000 each, plus whatever's in her savings and the life insurance money. $80,000 each. They were dividing up my home like a pie, calculating their shares down to the penny. David was nodding approvingly. The key is getting her to agree to the move before she starts spending the insurance payout on unnecessary things. Once elderly people get it in their heads that they want to travel or redecorate or whatever, they can blow through money fast. Unnecessary thing like what? Enjoying the last years of my life. Like maintaining some independence and dignity? Like actually living instead of just existing? How much do you think the life insurance was? Michael asked, leaning forward with interest. Harold was pretty tight-lipped about finances, Jennifer said, but I'm guessing at least $200,000, maybe more, plus her savings, plus the house, plus Harold's 401k that she inherited. We're probably looking at close to $600,000 total. My legs nearly gave out. They were discussing my inheritance like it was already theirs. Like I was already dead. These were my children, the babies I'd nursed, the toddlers I'd chased around this very backyard, the teenagers I'd supported through their mistakes and heartbreaks, and they were calculating my net worth like stockbrokers analyzing a portfolio. The important thing, David continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in his accounting practice, is presenting a united front. She can't think this is about money. It has to be about her safety, her well-being, our concern for her health. Exactly, Patricia agreed. We're loving children who want what's best for our aging mother. We're worried about her living alone, worried about her safety, worried about her making poor decisions. Poor decisions? What poor decisions? I paid my bills on time, maintained my house, drove safely, managed my medical appointments, and lived independently. What poor decisions were they referring to? What about the stuff in the house? Michael asked. Some of that furniture is antique. Mom's always talking about Dad's coin collection, and I've seen some of those pieces. They're worth decent money. We'll handle all that when the time comes, Jennifer said dismissively. The main thing is getting her into assisted living as soon as possible. The longer we wait, the more expensive this gets for everyone. The more expensive this gets for everyone. Translation, the more money I might spend on myself, on my own care, my own comfort, my own happiness, the less would be left for them to inherit. I stood there behind my own hedge, on my own property, listening to my own children plan my institutional future so they could divide up my assets. Children I'd sacrificed everything for. Children I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college while living on ramen noodles and generic grocery. Children I'd loved unconditionally for their entire lives. That's when I realized I'd raised 4 strangers. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when Patricia said something that made my heart actually skip a beat and my hands start trembling. Has anyone talked to lawyer Collins about getting power of attorney? If Mom's declared incompetent to manage her own affairs, we can make all these decisions without her input. Declared incompetent. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could control my money without my consent. They were planning to strip me of my legal rights, my autonomy, my dignity. I already made some inquiries, David said, and my blood turned to ice water. Collins thinks it's doable if we document some concerning behaviors. Memory issues, poor judgment, that sort of thing. Memory issues, poor judgment. They were planning to build a case against my mental capacity based on lies. They were going to fabricate evidence that I was losing my mind. What kind of concerning behaviors? Michael asked, leaning in with interest. Oh, you know, David said with a casual wave of his hand. Leaving the stove on, forgetting appointments, getting confused about bills, maybe some medication mix-ups. The kind of thing that happens to everyone her age, but looks bad on paper when you're trying to prove diminished capacity. They were going to lie, they were going to invent incidents, manufacture evidence, and present false testimony to a court to have me declared mentally incompetent. My own children were planning to commit perjury to steal my freedom and my money. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I actually had to grip the hedge to keep from falling over. This wasn't just about wanting their inheritance early. This was about destroying me as a person, reducing me to a helpless ward of the state so they could control everything I'd worked for my entire life. I backed away from the hedge carefully, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I managed to get back to my car without being seen, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove around the block 3 times, tears streaming down my face, until I was sure they were gone. When I finally went back into my house, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall for 2 hours, trying to process what I'd heard. 52 years of marriage, 47 years of motherhood, a lifetime of sacrifice, love, and devotion. And this was how it ended. My own children were planning to rob me blind and lock me away so they could spend my money in peace. But here's what David, Jennifer, Patricia, and Michael didn't know about their dear old mom. Dorothy Patterson didn't survive the Great Depression, raise 4 children as a single mother, and care for an Alzheimer's patient for 15 years by being weak or stupid. I lived through things these children couldn't imagine. I'd stretched a dollar until it screamed work jobs that left me exhausted to my bones, and made impossible decisions about family finances that kept us housed and fed when times were tough. I'd negotiated with bill collectors, managed medical crises, and somehow found ways to pay for school supplies and Christmas presents even when the bank account was nearly empty. When Harold was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I became his full-time caregiver while still working part-time to keep our insurance. I learned to manage his medications, handle his doctor appointments, and maintain his dignity even as the disease stripped away pieces of the man I loved. I fought with insurance companies, researched treatment options, and made decisions about his care that no wife should have to make. I'd been fighting battles since before my children were born, and I'd won most of them through intelligence, determination, and sheer stubborn refusal to be defeated. They thought they were dealing with a confused elderly woman who could be easily manipulated. They had no idea they were about to go to war with a woman who'd been fighting battles since before they were born. That's when I decided they had messed with the wrong grandmother. What I was about to do would teach them that underestimating Dorothy Patterson was the biggest mistake of their lives. After that Tuesday morning revelation, I spent 3 days in what I can only describe as emotional shock. I'd cry for an hour, then get angry for an hour, then feel numb for an hour. The cycle repeated until I thought I might lose my mind for real, which would have made my children's plan a lot easier to execute. I barely ate, I couldn't sleep. I jumped every time the phone rang, expecting one of them to call with another concerned conversation about my living situation. The house that had been my sanctuary for 32 years suddenly felt like a trap, and I found myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if they were watching me, documenting my behavior, building their case against my competency. But on Friday morning, something shifted. I woke up before dawn with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. The fog of hurt and betrayal was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something that had been forged in the fires of decades of challenges and hardship. I made myself a pot of coffee, sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and started to plan. If my children wanted to play games with Dorothy Patterson's future, they were about to learn that their mother had been playing games a lot longer than they had. The first thing I did was call my bank. Mrs. Patterson, Sally Morrison, my personal banker for the past 15 years, sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. Sally had helped me navigate the financial maze after Harold's death, had walked me through the insurance claims and account transfers with patience and kindness. She was one of the few people who truly understood my financial situation. "How are you holding up, dear? I was so sorry to hear about Harold." "Thank you, Sally. I'm doing as well as can be expected. Listen, I need to ask you about something confidential." "Of course. What can I help you with?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment where I either trusted Sally to help me or I faced this battle alone. If someone were trying to gain access to my accounts, say through power of attorney or conservatorship, what kind of protections do I have? There was a pause, and I could almost hear Sally's mental gears turning. "Mrs. Patterson, is someone trying to access your accounts without permission? Let's just say I want to be prepared for any possibilities." Sally's voice became businesslike, professional. "Well, first of all, nobody can access your accounts without proper legal documentation. Power of attorney has to be signed by you voluntarily, and conservatorship requires a court order based on medical evidence. But Miss Patterson, if you're concerned about someone trying to manipulate your finances, there are steps we can take to protect you." "What kind of steps?" "We can add additional security measures to your accounts, require in-person verification for large transactions, set up alerts for any unusual activity. We can even establish a separate account that only you can access, regardless of any future legal complications. A separate account that only I could access." Now that was interesting. "Sally, I'd like to schedule a meeting this week if possible." And I'd prefer if we kept this conversation between us for now. Absolutely, Mrs. Patterson. How about Monday morning, first thing? Monday morning, I walked into First National Bank, carrying a briefcase I hadn't used since my bookkeeping days. 40 years early, I'd spent the weekend organizing documents, making lists, and preparing for what I was beginning to think of as the most important business meeting of my life. Sally had prepared paperwork for what she called a financial security consultation. Her office felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could speak freely about my fears and plans without worrying about being overheard or judged. Mrs. Patterson, she said, closing her office door behind us, before we begin, I want you to know that everything we discuss is completely confidential. Banking privacy laws protect our conversations, and I take client confidentiality very seriously. Now, can you tell me more about your concern? I told her everything. The coordinated phone calls, the family meeting in my backyard, the plan to have me declared incompetent, the discussion of my assets like I was already dead. I showed her the notes I'd taken immediately after overhearing their conversation while the words were still fresh in my memory. Sally's expression grew more serious with each detail I shared. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and nodded with what looked like recognition. Miss Patterson, I have to tell you, we see this more often than you'd think. Adult children who view their aging parents as financial opportunities rather than family members. It's heartbreaking, but it's not uncommon. The banking industry has specific protocols for dealing with suspected elder financial abuse. Elder financial abuse. Hearing it put in those terms made my stomach clench, but Sally was right. That's exactly what my children were planning. They were planning to abuse me financially, legally, and emotionally. What can I do about it? Sally opened a folder thick with documents. Several things. First, we're going to establish what's called a revocable living trust. This will protect your assets from anyone trying to claim conservatorship. Second, we're going to create a separate checking account with enhanced security features. Third, I'm going to refer you to an attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse. She pulled out more documents. There's something else. If you're concerned about family members monitoring your finances, we can help you restructure your assets in ways that would make their plans more difficult to execute. What do you mean? Well, for example, if someone is counting on inheriting your house, they might be surprised to learn that you've donated it to charity. If someone is planning to access your savings, they might be shocked to discover that you've moved those funds into accounts they know nothing about. I leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Tell me more. We spent 3 hours restructuring my entire financial life, and with each document Sally prepared, I felt a little more of my power returning. The life insurance payout, $285,000, significantly more than my children had guessed, went into a new trust account that would be completely invisible to anyone trying to track my assets. My savings, which totaled nearly $150,000 after 5 decades of careful money management, were moved to a credit union in the next county. Harold's pension survivor benefits would continue to flow into a new checking account with enhanced security features. Every dollar I owned was being repositioned like pieces on a chessboard. But the most satisfying part was the house deed transfer. Sally introduced me to an attorney named Rebecca Walsh, who specialized in estate planning and elder protection. Rebecca explained how we could transfer ownership of my house to a revocable trust that would donate the property to Habitat for Humanity upon my death, unless I chose to revoke the donation. Mrs. Patterson, Rebecca said, this type of arrangement serves multiple purposes. First, it protects the asset from anyone trying to force a sale for your care. Second, it ensures that if something happens to you, the property goes to people who truly need it rather than people who simply want it. And third, it's completely revocable. You maintain full control and can change your mind at any time. The beauty of it was stunning. My children were counting on inheriting a house worth $320,000, but that house would never be theirs to claim. Instead, it would build homes for families who understood the value of shelter, who would appreciate what they received rather than simply expecting it. But the most satisfying part was what Sally called the accountability trail. Patterson, if your children are planning to document concerning behaviors to support an incompetency claim, we need to document your competency. Every transaction, every decision, every conversation we have will be recorded and witnessed. If anyone questions your mental state, we'll have evidence that you were making complex financial decisions with perfect clarity. Every document I signed was witnessed by multiple bank employees. Every decision was explained in detail and every conversation was logged with dates and times. If my children wanted to claim I was mentally incompetent, they'd have to explain how an incompetent person had successfully restructured a complex estate in a single week. By Wednesday, I had new bank accounts my children knew nothing about, legal protections they couldn't circumvent, and a paper trail that would prove my competency to any court in the country. But I was just getting started. The next phase of my plan required something I hadn't done in years, acting. I needed to convince my children that their dear old mom was ready to cooperate with their scheme while actually setting them up for the biggest shock of their lives. Thursday morning I called each of my children. I'd rehearsed these conversations in my mirror, practicing the tone of a confused, overwhelmed elderly woman who was finally ready to admit she needed help. David, it's Mom. I've been thinking about what you said about the house being too much for me, and I think you might be right. I could practically hear him sit up straighter. Really, Mom? You're open to considering other living arrangements? I am. In fact, I've been doing some research on senior communities, and I found a few that look interesting. I was wondering if you could come visit this week. I'd like to discuss this as a family. Of course, I'll fly in Friday night. Should I call the others? Actually, I already did. We're having a family dinner Sunday at 2 p.m. I'm making pot roast, just like when you were kids. The excitement in David's voice was unmistakable. Mom, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you for being open-minded about this. Open-minded? Right, if he only knew how open-minded I was being about completely restructuring their futures. I made identical calls to Jennifer, Patricia, and Mike. All of them were thrilled that their dear old mom was finally seeing reason. All of them cleared their schedules to attend Sunday dinner. All of them were probably already mentally spending their inheritance money. They had no idea what was coming. Friday I spent the day preparing, not cooking. That would come later, but preparing documents, organizing evidence, and setting up what I like to think of as my presentation materials. I created a detailed timeline of their coordinated phone calls, complete with dates, times, and direct quotes from each conversation. I printed out copies of all the financial documents Sally and Rebecca had prepared, organizing them in a folder that would make any lawyer proud. I even created a transcript of the conversation I'd overheard in my backyard, typing out every word I could remember while it was still fresh in my memory. Saturday I drove to Office Depot and had several items laminated and bound. I also stopped by the florist and bought a beautiful arrangement for my dining room table. If I was going to destroy my children's dreams, I was going to do it in style. Saturday evening I called my neighbor Helen Chen. Helen had been watching the comings and goings at my house with increasing concern, and I knew she'd noticed the unusual number of cars in my driveway earlier that week. Helen, I wanted to let you know that I'm having all 4 children over for dinner tomorrow. It's going to be a family meeting of sorts. Oh, that's wonderful, Dorothy. It's been so long since I've seen them all together. Is everything all right? Everything's going to be just fine, Helen. In fact, I think tomorrow might be the most important family dinner we've ever had. Sunday morning I cooked pot roast with all the fixings, just like I used to when they were teenagers. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was preparing what might be our last family meal together, at least for a very long time. The house smelled like home, like family, like love. The dining room table was set with my good china. The flowers were arranged perfectly, and my folder of documents was hidden in the kitchen, ready to be retrieved at the right moment. They arrived within 10 minutes of each other, just after 2. David looked pleased and confident, like a man about to close a profitable business deal. Jennifer was already taking notes on her phone, probably calculating closing costs and moving expenses. Patricia had brought me a brochure for a luxury senior living community in Denver, complete with glossy photos of smiling elderly people participating in activities they'd probably never choose on their own. Michael carried a folder full of real estate listings and what looked like legal documents. They were like vultures circling a carcass, except the carcass was still breathing and planning to bite back. Mom, Jennifer said, giving me a hug that felt more like a business handshake, you look wonderful. I'm so glad you're ready to take this next step. Well, I said, serving everyone generous portions of pot roast and mashed potatoes, when you get to be my age, you realize how important it is to make practical decisions about the future. Exactly, David agreed, digging into his meal with enthusiasm. And Mom, I want you to know, we're all here to help make this transition as smooth as possible. We've done a lot of research, and we have some excellent options for you. We've already started researching communities, Patricia added, sliding her Denver brochure across the table with practiced efficiency. This place has a golf course, a spa, activities directors. You'd love it. The residents seemed so happy and engaged. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of grateful elderly mother perfectly. That does sound lovely, Patricia. Tell me, what would happen to this house if I moved to one of these communities? Michael leaned forward eagerly. Well, obviously, we'd need to sell it to fund your new living situation. But don't worry about any of that, Mom. We'll handle all the details, real estate, legal paperwork, moving arrangements, everything. Handle all the details. How thoughtful of you. They spent the next hour outlining their plan with the efficiency of a corporate presentation. How they'd found several suitable communities in different price ranges. How they'd already spoken to real estate agents about listing the house and gotten preliminary market assessment. how they'd researched the best ways to liquidate my belongings, including getting appraisals on Harold's coin collection and my antique furniture, how they'd looked into financial management services for elderly people who might become confused about money matters. I listened to every word, nodding and smiling and asking the occasional clarifying question. They thought I was agreeing to their proposal. They thought they were convincing a confused old woman to sign away her independence. "Now, Mom," David said, pulling out a folder, "there are some legal documents we should discuss. Nothing complicated, just some paperwork to make sure everything goes smoothly." "What kind of paperwork?" "Well, power of attorney documents so we can help you manage your finances during the transition, and some healthcare directives so we can make sure you get the best possible care." Power of attorney, there it was, exactly as I'd overheard them planning. They were trying to get me to sign away my legal rights voluntarily, which would be much easier than having me declared incompetent in court. "That sounds very responsible," I said carefully. "But I think I'd like to have my own attorney look at these documents before I sign anything. At my age, it's important to be careful about legal matters." The brief flash of annoyance that crossed David's face was quickly replaced by a patronizing smile. "Of course, Mom, but honestly, these are pretty standard documents. We had our attorney prepare them to save you the expense of hiring your own lawyer." "Their attorney, not my attorney. Their attorney who was working in their interests, not mine. I appreciate that, dear, but I think I'd still feel more comfortable having my own representation. It's nothing personal, it's just good business practice." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, hiring an attorney is expensive, and honestly, it might just complicate things unnecessarily. We're your children. We have your best interests at heart." "Best interests?" "My best interests, as defined by people who saw me as a bank account with their names on it." "Of course you do, sweetheart. But your father always said that in business matters, it's better to be safe than sorry." They exchanged glances around the table. This wasn't going according to their script. The confused, overwhelmed elderly woman they'd expected was showing signs of business savvy and independence. Jennifer tried a different approach. "Mom, we're just trying to make this as easy as possible for you. Moving to a care community is a big change, and there are a lot of details to manage. We want to handle everything so you don't have to stress about it. And I appreciate that, truly. But I've been managing my own affairs for 73 years, and I think I can handle the transition to managed care with appropriate professional guidance." Patricia's voice took on a slightly sharper edge. "Mom, are you having second thoughts about this? Because if you're not ready to make this move, maybe we need to consider other options for your safety." "Other options for my safety?" That was a thinly veiled threat, if I'd ever heard one. She was suggesting that if I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they might pursue involuntary commitment. "Oh, I'm not having second thoughts at all," I said sweetly. "In fact, I'm more committed to making some major changes in my life than I've ever been. Some of these changes might surprise you, but I think they're exactly what this family needs." They relaxed slightly, thinking I was agreeing to their plan. If only they knew what changes I was actually referring to. After dessert, I stood up and cleared my throat. "Children, before we go any further with this discussion, there's something I need to share with you." I left the dining room and returned with a large folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents. The folder was thick with papers, organized with tabs and dividers, looking very official and very ominous. I placed it on the table and sat back down, my hands folded calmly on top of it. "What's that, Mom?" Michael asked, and I could hear the nervousness creeping into his voice. "This," I said, opening the folder with deliberate slowness, "is documentation of a conversation that took place in my backyard last Tuesday morning." The change in the room was instant and dramatic. The color drained from David's face. Jennifer stopped taking notes on her phone and set it down with shaking hands. Patricia's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. Michael looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You see, children, I came home from the grocery store to find all four of you having what I believe you called a strategy meeting. Right here on my property. Discussing my financial assets, planning my institutional future, calculating your inheritance shares." I pulled out the first document, a typed transcript of everything I'd overheard, word for word, with timestamps and direct quotations. "Jennifer, you said, and I quote, the key is getting her to agree to the move before she starts spending the insurance payout on unnecessary things." "Unnecessary things? Like what, Jennifer? Like enjoying my remaining years? Like maintaining my independence? Like having some dignity in my old age?" Jennifer's face had gone completely white, her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "David, you mentioned getting power of attorney by having me declared incompetent, you said, and again I quote, Collins thinks it's doable if we document some concerning behaviors, memory issues, poor judgment, that sort of thing. I looked directly at David, letting the full weight of my disappointment show in my eyes. You were planning to fabricate evidence of dementia. You were going to lie to a court to steal my legal right. Mom, David started, his voice cracking. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I pulled out another document, this one bearing the official letterhead of First National Bank. This is a bank statement showing that I moved $285,000 in life insurance funds into a new trust account on Monday, the same day you thought I was too incompetent to manage my own finances. David's face went from white to a sickly green color. The number was significantly higher than they'd estimated, and the fact that I'd moved it proved I was far more financially savvy than they'd assumed. I pulled out another document. This is a letter from my attorney confirming that I've restructured all my assets to protect them from financial abuse. The same day I supposedly had memory issues and poor judgment, Patricia found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Mom, we were only trying to help. Help yourselves to my money. I pulled out the final document from this section, and this is a deed transferring ownership of this house to a charitable trust. Upon my death, this property will be donated to Habitat for Humanity to build homes for deserving families. The silence in my dining room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. 4 successful adults, all in their 40s and 50s, sitting at their childhood dining room table like scolded children who'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Except these cookies were worth over $500,000, and the consequences were about to be far more serious than a timeout. Michael was the first to find his voice. Mom, you can't be serious. You can't give away our inheritance to charity. Your inheritance? I leaned back in my chair, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Michael, when did my house become your inheritance? When did my life insurance money become your inheritance? When did my life's work and savings become your inheritance? Well, he stammered, looking around the table for support from his siblings. You're our mother, we're your children. When I die, my assets will go where I choose to send them. And right now, I'm choosing to send them to people who understand the value of what they're receiving. Jennifer finally looked up from her phone, where she'd been frantically trying to calculate how much money had just disappeared from their expected windfall. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't punish us for being concerned about your welfare. Concerned about my welfare? I pulled out a printed email from the folder. This is an email David sent to Attorney Collins 3 days ago, inquiring about the process for having an elderly parent declared incompetent. David, would you like me to read it aloud? David's face had gone from green to a color I'd never seen on a human being before. Mom, please. Dear Mr. Collins, I need to discuss options for gaining legal guardianship over my 73-year-old mother, who is showing signs of cognitive decline. She lives alone in a large house and may be vulnerable to financial exploitation. I looked up at David. Financial exploitation. That's ironic, don't you think? Patricia tried a different approach, her voice taking on the professional tone she used with difficult patience. Mom, we love you. We were only trying to protect you. Protect me from what, Patricia? From enjoying my own money? From living in my own house? From making my own decisions about my own life? From making mistakes, she said defensively, from people who might take advantage of you. I laughed, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant sound. People like you mean? The room fell silent again. I could see them exchanging glances, trying to figure out how to salvage this situation. They were probably wondering if I was bluffing, if the documents were real, if their carefully laid plans had truly collapsed in the span of a single dinner conversation. Time to show them exactly how real this was. David, I said, my voice taking on the tone I'd used when he was 12 years old and had done something particularly disappointing. Remember when you were 12 and you stole $20 from my purse to buy baseball cards? He nodded reluctantly, clearly not understanding where this was going. You lied to my face about it. You blamed your little brother. You even suggested that maybe I'd miscounted my money, but I knew the truth, and I waited until you were ready to confess. I remember. It took 3 weeks, but eventually you came to me, crying, admitting what you'd done. You were so sorry, so ashamed. You promised you'd never steal from me again. I looked directly at him. This time, you weren't planning to steal $20, David. You were planning to steal my entire life. David's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished with my trip down memory lane. Jennifer, when you were 16, you crashed my car and lied about it, said someone hit you in a parking lot, but I knew better. I waited for you to tell the truth. Jennifer was staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes. You eventually confessed, and I forgave you. I even paid for the repairs myself, rather than making you work it off. Because that's what mothers do. We forgive our children's mistakes, and help them learn from them. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. But this wasn't a mistake, Jennifer. This was a calculated plan to rob me blind. Patricia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Mom, we're sorry. We made a terrible mistake. Sorry, I considered the word, rolling it around in my mouth like it had a bad taste. Patricia, if I hadn't overheard your little meeting, what would have happened? Would you have suddenly developed a conscience? Would you have decided that your mother deserved better treatment? She didn't answer because we all knew the truth. If I hadn't accidentally come home early from my grocery shopping, their plan would have proceeded exactly as they'd outlined it. Michael, you've been in my house every week for the past month, eating my food, hugging me goodbye, telling me you love me, while secretly planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. Do you have any idea how that feels? Michael was crying too now, great heaving sobs that shook his shoulders. Mom, we never meant to hurt you. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. There's a difference, but I wasn't done with my revelations yet. In fact, the biggest shock was still to come. There's something else you should know, I said, returning to my seat and pulling out a manila envelope I'd saved for last. The life insurance money you were so eager to inherit, that's not the only money Harold left me. 4 pairs of eyes looked up sharply, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. Despite everything that had just happened, despite learning that their inheritance was being donated to charity, the mention of additional money still sparked their interest. Their greed was so deeply ingrained it was almost pathetic. I pulled out another document, this one from Harold's longtime financial advisor whom none of my children had ever met. This is a statement from Harold's retirement account that he never told any of you about. The one he funded for 35 years without touching a penny. The one that's been growing through compound interest and careful investments for decades. I placed the statement in the center of the table with deliberate ceremony. The balance was... Jennifer's mouth fell open so wide I thought her jaw might unhinge. David made a choking sound like he was trying to swallow his tongue. Patricia grabbed the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. Michael just stared at the paper like it was written in hieroglyph. Add that to the life insurance money, my personal savings, the house value, and a few other assets you didn't know about, I continued, savoring every word, and we're talking about roughly 1.4 million. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap, reverberating through the dining room and changing the very atmosphere of the space. $1.4 million, I repeated slowly, letting each syllable land like a hammer blow, that you will never see a penny of. David found his voice first, though it came out as a croak. Mom, you can't mean that. Oh, I absolutely mean it. In fact, let me tell you exactly where that money is going. I pulled out a final folder, this one containing donor agreements and charitable trust documents, each one properly notarized, legally binding, and absolutely irrevocable. But Mom, Patricia finally whispered, her voice barely audible, what about the grandchildren? What about their college funds? What about our family's futures? What about them, Patricia? Your children barely know me. When's the last time any of my grandchildren called me just to say hello? When's the last time they visited without being forced to? When's the last time they showed any interest in their grandmother beyond birthday gifts and Christmas presents? She couldn't answer because we all knew the truth. My 8 grandchildren saw me maybe twice a year, treated me like a distant relative rather than family, and had been taught to think of me as the boring old grandmother who told long stories and gave practical gifts instead of the latest gadgets. Your children will have the same opportunities you had. Parents who work hard and sacrifice to give them what they need. The difference is, hopefully, you'll teach them to value family relationships for more than their monetary worth. Michael made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Mom, we can change. We can be better. We can show you that we deserve another chance. Another chance at what, Michael? Another chance to pretend you love me while secretly planning my institutionalization. Another chance to lie to my face while calculating my net worth behind my back? I gathered up all the documents and put them back in the folder with deliberate precision. The legal papers have been signed. The assets have been transferred. The charitable donations are irrevocable. There's nothing left to inherit and nothing left to fight over. Jennifer was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. Mom, we're your children. We love you. You love my money. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the front door, opening it wide. The afternoon sun streamed in, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny witnesses to this family's destruction. I think it's time for you to leave. They didn't move at first, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Their inheritance was gone. Their mother had outsmarted them completely. Their financial futures had just been donated to charity while they sat eating pot roast and mashed potatoes. David stood up first, his legs shaky. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't throw away our family over a misunderstanding. I'm not throwing away our family, David. You threw it away the day you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. One by one they filed past me toward the door. Jennifer tried to hug me, but I stepped aside. Patricia whispered, I'm sorry, as she passed, but I didn't respond. Michael paused in the doorway, looking back at me with something that might have been regret. Mom, is this really how you want this to end? with all of us hating each other? Michael, I said quietly, I don't hate you. I'm disappointed in you. I'm hurt by you. I'm shocked by what you were willing to do to me, but I don't hate you. Then why are you punishing us like this? I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself, and I'm teaching you a lesson about consequences. Actions have consequences, Michael. Even family action. He walked away without another word, and I closed the door behind him. After they left, I leaned against the door, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving me emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. I walked back to my kitchen, stepping over the forgotten brochures and legal documents they'd left scattered on my dining room floor. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table where I'd planned this entire operation just days earlier. The house felt different now. Quieter, yes, but also cleaner somehow. Like I'd swept out years of accumulated resentment and betrayal, like I'd finally taken back control of my own life. The phone rang an hour later. Then again. David, Jennifer, Patricia, and Michael all trying to call, probably to negotiate, to apologize, to find some way to undo what couldn't be undone. I didn't answer any of them. The next morning I called Sally at the bank. Mrs. Patterson, how did your family dinner go? Exactly as planned, Sally. The children now understand that their inheritance has been redistributed to more deserving recipients. How did they take the news? About as well as you'd expect. But Sally, I need to ask you about something else. What's the process for changing my phone number? Sally chuckled, a sound that held both sympathy and admiration. I take it they're not accepting the new arrangements gracefully? Let's just say my phone has been ringing non-stop since yesterday evening. We can help you with that. And Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that what you did took incredible courage. A lot of people in your situation would have just accepted the abuse and hoped for the best. That afternoon I drove to the Habitat for Humanity office to meet with the director, a lovely woman named Carol Stevens, who nearly cried when I explained what I was donating and why. Mrs. Patterson, this is the most generous single donation we've ever received. We can build 3, maybe 4 homes with the value of your property. I want you to understand something, Carol. This house isn't just a donation, it's a lesson. My children thought they could steal it from me, so now it's going to families who will truly appreciate having a home. Carol nodded, understanding immediately. We'll make sure the families who receive these homes understand the story behind this gift. They'll know that their homes came from a woman who believed in protecting what's precious. Over the following weeks, I heard through mutual friends that my children were struggling with the reality of their new situation. David had apparently been counting on his inheritance to fund his daughter's college education, money that was now going to single mothers who would work multiple jobs to earn their degree. Jennifer had planned to use her share as a down payment on a bigger house, money that was now feeding hungry families who understood the value of every meal. Patricia was supposed to use her portion to help her son start his business, money that was now funding Alzheimer's research for families who cared for their loved ones with dignity. Michael had been relying on his inheritance to expand his construction company, money that was now helping elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse. All of those plans were now impossible. But you know what? I didn't feel sorry for them. Not one. They were all successful adults, with good jobs and comfortable lives. Their children would go to college the same way they had, through hard work, scholarships, and parents who prioritized education over entitlement. They would buy houses the same way Harold and I had, by saving money and living within their means. They would start businesses and expand companies the way millions of people do, through loans, investors, and gradual growth built on sound business principles rather than inherited wealth. What they wouldn't do was build their futures on their mother's grave. 3 months after that Sunday dinner, I was sitting in my garden when my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, came over with a plate of homemade cookies. Chen was a sweet woman whose own children visited her every weekend, brought their children for family dinners, and included her in their holiday celebrations. She couldn't understand how a family could just disappear. Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I haven't seen your children visiting lately. Is everything all right? Mrs. Chen, sometimes we have to make difficult choices to protect ourselves, even from the people we love most. She nodded thoughtfully, her weathered face showing the wisdom of someone who had lived through her own share of family difficulties. In my country we have a saying, the tree remembers the axe, but the axe forgets the tree. Some people take and take until there's nothing left to give. The tree remembers the axe. I thought about that metaphor for weeks afterward, how perfectly it captured the relationship between my children and me. They had been chopping away at my dignity, my independence, my financial security, while I remembered every cut. But they had already moved on, forgotten the damage they were planning to inflict, focused only on the rewards they expected to reap. 4 months later, I received a letter that changed everything about how I viewed my decision. It wasn't from any of my children, but from someone I'd never met. Dear Mrs. Patterson, it began in careful handwriting. My name is Maria Santos, and my family has just been approved to receive one of the Habitat homes being built with your donation. I wanted you to know that this house isn't just changing our lives, it's saving them. Maria went on to explain that she was a single mother of 3, working 2 jobs while studying to become a nurse. She'd been living in a 1-bedroom apartment with her children, saving every penny toward a down payment she never seemed able to reach. Her oldest daughter was sleeping on the living room couch, her 2 boys were sharing a fold-out bed, and Maria herself slept in a chair most nights to give the children more space. Patterson, I don't know why you chose to give away something so valuable to strangers like us, but I want you to know that we will never take this gift for granted. My children will grow up knowing that their home came from someone who believed they deserved better. We will honor your generosity every day we live in this house. I cried reading that letter. For the first time in months, they were tears of joy instead of tears of pain. A week later, I received another letter, this one from the food bank director. Dear Miss Patterson, your donation is allowing us to feed 400 families per month for the next 2 years. But more than that, it's allowing us to focus on nutrition education, cooking classes, and helping people develop sustainable food security. You've given us the resources to change lives, not just fill stomachs. Then came letters from scholarship recipients, single mothers like Maria who were working toward better futures for themselves and their children. Letters from Alzheimer's researchers who were using my donation to fund studies that might prevent other families from experiencing the heartbreak Harold and I had lived through. Letters from elderly people who'd been helped by the Financial Abuse Prevention Fund, people who understood what it felt like to be betrayed by family members who saw them as bank accounts rather than human beings. Every letter was from someone who understood the value of what they were receiving. Every letter was filled with genuine gratitude, specific plans for using the money wisely, and promises to pay it forward when they were able. My money was going to people who appreciated it, who needed it, who would use it to build better lives for themselves and their family. Meanwhile, my children remained silent. 6 months after the dinner confrontation, I was volunteering at the food bank when Carol Stevens from Habitat for Humanity called me with wonderful news. Dorothy, the first house funded by your donation is finished, and the Santos family is moving in this weekend. They've asked if you'd like to attend the dedication ceremony. That Saturday, I stood in front of a beautiful 3-bedroom house watching Maria Santos and her 3 children receive the keys to their new home. The children were crying with happiness, running from room to room, claiming bedrooms and planning where their few belongings would go. Maria kept thanking everyone who'd made this moment possible, but when she saw me in the crowd, she ran over and hugged me like I was her own mother. Mrs. Patterson, this is because of you. My children have their own bedrooms for the first time in their lives. We have a yard where they can play. We have a home. As I watched those children explore their new house with pure uninhibited joy, I thought about my own grandchildren. 8 grandchildren who barely knew me, who visited out of obligation, who would probably never understand what they'd lost when their parents chose greed over family. But Maria's children would grow up in a house built from love, sacrifice, and the belief that families should protect each other, not prey on each other. A year later, I was living my best life. I joined the church choir, where my voice might be creaky, but my enthusiasm was genuine. I'd started a book club with the other ladies from the neighborhood, and we tackled everything from romance novels to biographies of historical figures. I'd begun volunteering at the local elementary school as a reading tutor, helping children who struggled with literacy in the same patient way I'd once helped my own children with their homework. I had friends, activities, purpose, and peace. I also had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, take the occasional trip to visit places Harold and I had always talked about seeing, and enjoy my golden years without depending on anyone or worrying about financial security. My children, meanwhile, had learned to live within their means. Through the neighborhood gossip network, I heard that David's daughter had gotten into college on an academic scholarship and taken out student loans for the rest, just like millions of other kids, whose parents hadn't assumed they'd inherit enough money to pay for everything. Jennifer and her husband had bought a smaller house than they'd planned and discovered they were actually happier with less space to maintain and a mortgage payment they could handle comfortably. Patricia's son had started his business with a small bank loan and built it slowly, the right way, learning valuable lessons about financial responsibility and business planning. Michael had downsized his construction company but kept it profitable and sustainable, focusing on quality work rather than rapid expansion funded by anticipated inheritance money. They all survived. They all adapted. They all learned to build their futures on their own efforts instead of their mother's death. And me, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the refusal to enable their worst impulse. 2 years after that Sunday dinner, I received one final letter that made me consider that maybe, just maybe, something good had come from this painful experience. This one was from Patricia. Mom, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand now what we tried to do to you was unforgivable. I've been in therapy, trying to understand how I became someone who could plan to steal from her own mother. I can't excuse it, and I can't undo it, but I can promise you that I've learned from it. She went on to write that she'd started volunteering at a senior center, helping elderly people navigate financial decisions, and protecting them from family members who might try to take advantage of them. I see you in every elderly person I help, Mom. I see the dignity you deserved and didn't get from us. I'm trying to give other people what we should have given you: respect, protection, and love without condition. I read that letter 3 times before putting it in my special box, the box where I kept the letters from scholarship recipients, Habitat families, and food bank volunteers. Letters from people who understood the value of kindness. Did I forgive Patricia? I'm still working on that. Did I trust her? Not yet. Did I respect her for finally understanding what she'd done wrong? Yes, I did. But forgiveness and trust have to be earned, just like inheritance. And that's a lesson my children are still learning. Today, at 75 years old, I wake up every morning in my own home, make my own decisions, and spend my own money however I choose. I'm surrounded by friends who value me for who I am, not what I have. I volunteer for causes that matter to me. I travel when I want to. I live with dignity and independence. Most importantly, I sleep soundly every night, knowing that my life savings went to people who deserved them, people who understood sacrifice, appreciated generosity, and used their gifts to build better lives. My children thought they could manipulate a confused old lady into signing away her independence so they could inherit her wealth. Instead, they learned that Dorothy Patterson is nobody's fool and nobody's victim. They learned that actions have consequences, even family action. They learned that respect can't be inherited, it has to be earned. And they learned that sometimes, the people who deserve your generosity the least are the people who expect it the most. As for me, I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even against the people you love most. I learned that true family is about love and respect, not blood and money. And I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give to ungrateful people is the chance to learn gratitude the hard way. Now I want to hear from you. What city are you watching from, and how would you rate this story from? More importantly, have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself from family members who didn't have your best interests at heart? Share your story in the comments. Dorothy Patterson believes that we all need to stand up for ourselves, no matter our. Remember, dignity isn't something you inherit, it's something you demand, something you fight for, and something you never let anyone take away from you.